Hello, my name is Doru Valentin Căstăian, and I represent the Faculty of History, Philosophy, and Theology from the Lower Danube University in Galați. Now I'll present to you my article, Ascendant and Descendent Types of Thinking and the Impact on Toleration as an Educational Value. One of the most important problems in the contemporary world, with a special touch in case of post-communist East European world, is related to a plethora of religious, quasi-religious, or secular beliefs that often lead to cultural wars and polarization that are phenomena that deeply affect the roots of democracy and the tendency towards tolerance and mutual respect which democratic world is based on. Traditional societies like Romanian society come to encounter postmodern patterns of thinking and action and face multiple dilemmas when it comes to globalization or dealing with alternative modes of thinking, alternative spiritualities, or different worldviews that challenge traditional premises. Inside these complex cultural frames, an important and unique role is played by our systems of morals, which often sustain conflicting values and ways of action which come to describe a deeply pluralistic social space. My article tries to apply a vectorial analysis to the polymorphic social and cultural space, showing that these various conflicts come from accepting and putting at work two opposing general patterns in describing reality, which I shall call the ascendant and the descendant view of the world. Understanding through critical thinking the difference between these two equally sustainable patterns of organizing reality may lead to increased tolerance and dialogue between the members of the same society. The ascendant pattern comes with a general model that sustains that more complex comes from simpler elements through biological and cultural evolution, and therefore there is no end to evolution and no privileged structures. The ascendant pattern sustains an ascendant type of morals. I shall call it ascendant moral system. An ascendant moral system supposes that our moral beliefs and the behavior they imply are cultural elements, instruments created by people during their cultural evolution. Different systems of morals are socio-cultural constructs that are required by certain objective limitations of the human beings, and they aim at solving certain problems that concern their evolutionary ecology. This ascendant view is compatible with a pluralistic view that is not a relativistic one, because it is anchored in the limited human ethology. The ascendant view implies some kind of form of realism in understanding and describing the world, most often scientific realism. According to this pattern, there is an access to the factual level of reality which can be described, and human beings are fully describable as part of this factual level of reality. As eusocial beings, people created group adaptations like cultural and moral theories. So these theories will reflect the psychological, biological, and ethological particularities of the groups being permanently sustained by the large and malleable common ethological fund. This model doesn't need to be progressive, as evolution is not progress, but ongoing process of adaptation. This pattern also implies a fundamental problem, which I choose to call the problem of grounding. How to live inside the cultural and moral system knowing that it has strictly an instrumental value and that it will be nonetheless destructured and abandoned in the course of future cultural evolution. How it can be used as high ground for action knowing that even human ethology is transformed during this evolution. Descendant patterns. I call descendant patterns that supports a descendant morality those types of systems that assume the presence of one or several interconnected metaphysical truths that explain and ground all that exists at lower levels. Any metaphysical truth shows itself primarily through cultural memes that form mimetic networks. Mimetic networks are complex, adaptive, emergent networks that can assimilate indefinitely natural and cultural facts and translate them through complex cultural coding in elements of meaning that either sustain, go against, or are neutral in relation towards the premises of the system. I'm using here the concept of a complex adaptive network, taking it from philosopher Mark Taylor. In his book, After God, Taylor defines religions in terms of a complex adaptive emergent network. Religion is an emergent, I quote, religion is an emergent, complex adaptive network of symbols, myths, and rituals that one hand figure schemata of feeling, thinking, and acting in ways that lend life meaning and purpose, and on the other disrupt, dislocate, and disfigure every stabilizing structure. The complex adaptive emergent networks, or ECANs, have some properties, have some characteristic which I should always describe here, according also to Taylor. A. Emergent complex adaptive networks, ECANs, are comprised of many different parts that are not autonomous but are connected in multiple ways. These connections or relations determine the specific identity and characteristic of the members and components of the network. B. ECANs display spontaneous self-organization which complicates the relationship between interiority and exteriority in such a way that the line that is supposed to separate them becomes porous. In other words, ECANs are open rather than closed. C. In ECANs, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. Whole and parts are co-emergent, that is, neither can be itself apart from the other, and each becomes itself and through the other. D. The whole emerges from, but is not reducible to its parts. E. Individual agents, elements, or components always act within parameters of constraint. F. Since webs comprised or interrelated networks evolve over time, each configuration is also conditioned by the history of the network. ECANs therefore have a memory. G. Diverse components can interact both serially and in parallel. H. The complexity of the relationship among the members of a network creates positive feedback loops that move away from equilibrium. E. As positive feedback accelerates, it can approach a condition of self-organized criticality or the tipping point where a minor event can have a catastrophic systemic effect. J. Catastrophic effects are not caused by external exogenous factors. K. Since disruptions are systemic and therefore unavoidable, development is not continuous. Periods of stability are punctuated by periods of instability. So we can see that both the ascendant and the descendant, I'm ending quote. So we can see that both the ascendant and the descendant patterns of organizing reality and experience are ways of dealing with becoming. One accepting the destructuring power of reality, non-substantial, non-metaphysical, and evenemential. The other considering becoming as just a passing that can be infinitely and indefinitely translated inside ECANs. These two models predict different ways of dealing with new social and cultural phenomena. For example, in the ascendant model, any phenomenon occurring from artificial intelligence to technology applied to bioethics or human rights extensions is potentially culturally significant and has its place in the pluralistic landscape of cultural possibilities. Nevertheless, some of these events and phenomena may be viewed as abnormities or unnatural when thought inside of a descendant ECAN such religion. Critical thinking has now the task of delineating these two patterns, showing that they are both adaptive possibilities that cannot be thought of in terms of right or wrong, but in terms of opposing means for cultural adaptation. In a truly pluralistic and democratic world, they both can and may have access to the cultural, social, and political space. This doesn't mean that we cannot and won't find ascendant thinking inside descendant patterns, or vice versa, we won't find descendant thinking inside ascendant ones. These moves are possible, and this is the reason why evolution, biological evolution, for example, can be accepted inside religious descendant models, or religion can be accepted inside secular ascendant ones. But the grounding position remains clearly delineated in conformity with some vectorial predefined options. Finding the specific characteristic of the two options and taking the conflict out of the binary True false logical space opens new ways for tolerance and democratic pluralism and new ways for the education for tolerance at all levels. I thank you very much for your time.